Yes. Who said that? Was it the author of this fine book that's just come out, Here to Love, just released by the Good Book Company?
The endorsement is cracking.
Yes.
There seemed to be a very strong juxtaposition between modern and digital, so Wes Hub,
Yeah.
searches,
Oh.
and ancient Oxford-like sandstone.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts on, well, there's two questions. Number one, how do we bridge the digital to the sandstone, assuming that most in this room will represent sandstone more than digital, to use that paradigm? And secondly, maybe a more punchy question, do you think that theologically, in the future, discipleship can look like digital only, or must it incorporate some sort of sandstone capacity to it?
Yeah. Thought a lot about, if you're not a digital native, then you feel like sandstone is the primary way that you're going to relate to people. And if you are a digital native, you already don't answer the phone. So you can only, I think you can do, digital is very good at certain levels. My son moved here, funny enough, with us last year from Perth to do, and he's doing year 12 online with his school in Perth. And all his friends are his Perth friends. And he said, it hasn't been too bad, because I've still got all my friends. How? Well, just the way he thinks. It has to be a mix of both. I think digital's, Jackie Hill Perry was here the other week. Anyone know Jackie Hill Perry? Look her up. She's great. She's got a big digital footprint, Christianly. Would still say that the sandstone's important. People still want to hang out with other people at the moment. So what you might get in the whole future of where we're going as humans is wrapped up in that question. What does it mean to be fully incarnational, to use the term? I hate to use it, but I'm using it. And the whole transgender thing, I think, is a stepping stone to transhuman. How do we loose ourselves from the surly bonds of the physicality, right? And I think we've got to push back against that. The sandstone is a way, there's a lot wrapped up in it we don't like, but what also is wrapped up in it is the physicality of being with each other, right? Which I don't often like, but I need. So you have to keep doing things that you don't think work or you can't see the need of. If you think that, what am I trying to say? Like G.K. Chesterton said, there's a fence. You don't remove the fence until you find out what the fence was there for. And we've got a culture that's just been pulling down fences left, right and centre. Oh, that doesn't look like it's doing anything. That doesn't look like it's doing anything. And suddenly you realise things have fallen apart. Or a bull's got through into another, that's the problem. And so we've had a deconstructionist framework of the last 100 years of tearing down, and we haven't really been able to build things up very well. So what you're going to get, I think, is you're going to get reactions to the digitised only world, and you're going to get the craft world, so to speak. Can we all go and live on the Central Coast? Someone does live in even that. No, come on, that's right. So there's got to be a point at which humans can't just cope with it, and it's showing itself up in how we are struggling relationally. But at the same time, young people growing up today, you can't say to them, just get off your phone if someone's bullying you, because it is their life. And you can't complain about that because adults gave it to them, right? It's not as if some 12-year-olds were sitting around, here's a really good idea, let's find some technology which will allow us. That was us as adults. So I think you're going to get communities which opt out a little bit more of the digitised life and become a little bit Amish, for a better word. Has anyone read Disruptive Witness? by Alan O. Noble, or O. Noble Alan, as I call him, because it makes it sound like a knight of the realm. He's got a couple of great books. One's called You Are Not Your Own, Living for God in an Inhuman World, which you must read, and Disruptive Witness, which I can't remember I've got a Kindle copy in there, I'll have a look at it. And he said one of the things that happened was that when it came to technologies, the Amish had a view of technology that we think is a little bit weird. You know, it's buggies. I mean, I could just shave off the top of my mustache here and I'd look a bit Amish, but the question they asked first was, what will this technology do to the way we do community and relationship? It's the first question they asked. No, maybe they got a bit wrong and they got a bit, but that's the first question they asked about any technology they used. So television changed the way we relate to each other in a huge way. Oh, for the age of television, right? Because now we look at how technology's changed us in other ways. So you can be on a bus and everyone's on their phone, which is true. But you can see a painting of people on their broadsheet newspaper on the train in Sydney from the 50s. But the thing is, they're all reading the same paper. They're all taking information in from a certain source. And now we just fractured people living all over the place on this, more distracted than anything else. I think people can only do without the human contact for so long. That's why solitary confinement is a punishment. You may think, I'd love some solitary confinement for about 2 days. So I'm not sure. But I know that after COVID, the first thing we wanted to do was get back together again. Despite the fact that we like sitting watching church in our Jimmy Jams, having biscuits and coffee, right, for a few weeks. But once we didn't have to in Perth after those 2 terrible weeks of lockdown, sorry. When I say that in Victoria, people just cry. So I'd like to say I'm totally sure, but I'm not. Any other questions? Or I should have put that slide up. I put it on my other presentation. Yeah.
It's interesting what you're saying, that technologies open up opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
How do churches then connect with those people? You know, obviously there's still a large gap to bridge to get them actually into church involved.
Yeah, the thing about technology, it's still the gap, isn't it? Because people like to do their own thing. And I think people will observe and watch things for a long period of time before they ever join anything. A long period of time. But part of that problem, and this is something that was raised before, is that many young people go down the rabbit holes of conspiracy theory and the algorithm sends them further and further down it, right? So how do you disciple people away from those sorts of things if they've gone down that way? I'm not sure. But eventually people are starting to turn up in trickles. So, you know, anecdotally I speak to people and they're saying they're turning up at church. That people.
I suppose it's relying on that individual.
Yeah.
Or knowing another Christian who
Yeah.
witnesses to them or encourages them to attend.
But don't underestimate, you know, God can just go, you know, that's not good enough to you. You know, if he wants to save someone and he wants them to go to a church, he'll just break through by his Holy Spirit. In the same way in a Muslim community, Jesus appears to people in dreams. That doesn't sound very orthodox. No, but they're a Christian now and they love Jesus and they're reading the Bible. So you go, you take it up with God. So I wonder if we over worry about that a little bit and go, God will still draw the people he needs to. You might have some messy stuff to deal with, but I think you're going to have to deal with messy stuff anyway. In 2055, if someone comes to your church who's been living as a woman for 35 to 40 years, how do you disciple them when they want to become a Christian? Well, I know you've had surgery and you've lived as a woman, but next week, Discipleship 101, Lesson 1 is pants on, skirt off, right? No, you can't say that. You're going to have to figure that out because it's a messy world. And I think that's the complexities at the moment are that the tide of faith looks when I say the tide of faith, you've got to be careful that we don't think the 1950s versions of people are coming back, because I don't think they are. I think we're getting messy versions of a wasteland of people since the sexual revolution. It changed a lot of things, right? And how that comes back, I'm not quite sure. Does that make sense? Anything else or comments? I want to move on in the second session to say, to give you encouragement that I think that the church actually is well positioned culturally in who it is and who it follows to be something in the culture at the moment that people need. And in Futureproof, I unpacked it a little bit with a few issues. I said the first thing that the church will do, it can out-purpose the culture. People are looking for meaning and purpose. But the irony is we don't find ourselves. Purpose, it's about denying ourselves. The gospel framework is for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. At the center of the church is the purpose of Jesus. And I think people are looking for something that they don't know what they're looking for. And they're going down many rabbit holes to look for it. And I think the church has got something more purposeful to it in how it operates, which is why I think people are coming back to things like the crunchy versions of church because of the meaning and purpose thing. Let me give you an example. So Providence Church in Perth, where I was planted Providence Church Midland. It's part of a network of 3 churches. And there's about, 1,000 people now on the network. And every year, and it's coming up next week, I think, is Prov United, where at this Swan Christian College, which is where my church met, all 3 churches get together. It's a big enough venue to host everyone. And the A-list preacher of the church network preaches, and I never got to preach that, so obviously they lost my number. And the A-team musicians, and if you weren't on the stage for that, you're not that good. But every year they all get together, and then they have a big party on the lawn. And there's stalls, and the buying and selling of sheep and changing of money, and you get the drift, right? And one year, about 3 years ago, my friend Ollie goes to one of the other congregations, and he is the head of all the design for all the Westfield shopping centres, the interior shop fit outs. He heads up for Australia. And he bowls up to me at church and says, "Hey, I want to introduce you to someone. This is Claire. She's just become a Christian." Oh, wow. And I put on my Arnie Terminator 2 glasses to look at her and scan her. I need your motorbike. I need your, that. And I thought, she's just become a Christian. And she was like, my scanning glasses said 40-something, white, Western, well-educated woman who worked for Ollie in the creative industry. And there was her husband and kids, apparently, over there, who he wasn't Christian, but they seemed happy enough. I went, no, you can't become a Christian. You're a white, Western, well-educated woman in your early 40s who works in the creative industries. People like you don't become Christian. I understand it, right? If you're going to become a Christian in Australia today, you've got to be a Chinese national student down at Sydney University, and you're lured into a Bible study with a piece of pizza on the end of a fishing line, Next minute you're reading Mark's Gospel with some earnest young student, right? That's how you become a Christian in Australia, but not if you're a white, Western, well-educated woman who works in creative industries, right? I said, how? And she said, during COVID, everyone was losing their heads or losing their jobs, and I noticed something about Ollie that he wasn't. He just seemed like, wow, there's something about him, the way he lives his life, that looks different to everyone else in the crisis. So I asked him, and he said he was a Christian. I said, yeah, then what? And she said, oh, you're a Christian, could I have a Bible? Do you think I could have a Bible? I said, why did you? She said, I just felt there was something wrong. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I felt a heaviness in my life that I couldn't figure out. Wow. And I said, then what? And she said, I started reading the Bible and asking him questions. And then I said, could I come to church with you? He said, yeah, you can come to church with our family. And I came to church at Providence, where the A-list preacher was preaching every week, by the way, I'd say. And then what happened? Well, I went to church and I was waiting for her, She said, I heard a great sermon about the gospel and I became a Christian. Well, what? That's not possible. Look at you, you 40-year-old white Western well-educated woman who works in creative industries. And I was like stunned. I said, so how does it feel? That's the question you want to ask a newbie, right? How does it feel? Because once I was lost, but now I'm found, and once I was blind and now I see. How does it feel? And she said, it feels light, like a burden has rolled off me. I said, how else does it feel? Because I couldn't think of anything else to say. And she said, it feels like I don't need the approval of other people anymore if Jesus approves of me. Isn't that interesting in the world of where you do you go your way, and we'll look at that now, that everyone is anxious about what everyone else thinks about what they are doing. You do you, but woe betide you. You step out of line in the cultural narrative of where we're going. A white, Western, well-educated, happily married woman working in the creative industries becomes a Christian. Because people don't become Christian like that until they do, right? So that's the thing. And that flies in the face of where we're going culturally at some level, right? But she became a Christian and she found meaning and purpose, and it felt like this is what it's supposed to be. Now you can find meaning and purpose in bad things as well, let's face it. But there was something compelling about the way Ollie lived his life that she looked at and went, I've got all the same stuff as you, but how come yours looks different? I quote a lot of philosophers, and she's a great philosopher here. Taylor Swift gave the commencement address in 2022 at New York University at the commencement service. You can read the transcript online. Lists all her ex-boyfriend. No, it doesn't. How do I give advice to this many people about their life choices? I won't. Scary news. You're on your own now. Cool news. You're on your own now. And you read the rest of the transcript and it feels very much like keep your nose above the waterline. It's really hard out there. To the wealthiest, most educated, safest people on the planet. And I can't tell you anything too much. You're on your own. You figure it out for yourselves. It's this atomized world. And that's both cool and scary because it puts a lot of pressure on you to decide who you are with no framework. It looks superficially liberating, but it's actually crushing people. But when she says cool news is you're on your own now, she's really leaning into that full-on, expressive individualism is what you are. Be who you want. But it's not working for people because it's scary as well. Now here's another Rory Shiner quote. This isn't Rory, by the way. This is, I just should say that in case you haven't seen him. He said, we're not argued into expressive individualism, we're formed into it. To live in modern Australia is to be part of a relentless discipleship program. Every Pixar and Disney film, every graduation speech, every new novel and Netflix series is 100% on point. Your purpose in life is to find the true inner you and then to express that to the world. God is framed out. I don't think it's hostility towards Christianity that's our primary issue. I think it's just framing God out. There's no need of him in a world in which you're supposed to, everything says look into yourself and this is your purpose in life is to find the true inner you. But Taylor Swift is right. That is cool news. But it has a flip side to it. It means that if you get it wrong, it's all on you. And my wife is a clinical psychologist. And she sees a lot of people who are getting it wrong. And it is all on them. And they don't know what to do about it. It's the great irony. It promises freedom, but it's very binding on people as well at the same time. And I think those words are really interesting to me. God is framed out. Because I don't think the answer in our culture is to find the Christian version of Pixar or Disney. I think it's how do we frame God in meaningfully in the communities we're in? How do we frame God meaningfully in for our young people who are going to uni and have friends who they don't feel the yuck factor about how those friends live sexually? My age, nearly 60, we had the yuck factor when we were younger about all sorts of sexual minority issues. My Christian young people in church today don't have that yuck factor. We can't play that yuck factor card with them in that same sense, nor should we. And I think that's the kind of world we live in. So how do you frame God back in purposefully for these people? And I think part of the job of the church is to say, we will help you frame God in. We will live life and we'll use digital and we'll use whatever we have to drip filter God into your life every day of the week. We'll find ways to do that. And obviously you've got ways to do that in church and Bible study and all those sorts of things. But I think future generations are going to look for ways that are little drip filters throughout their weeks, just to keep them going. It's a very fractious world. But it's a discipleship program that we're countering them in another discipleship.
What's your thoughts on, I hear that what you're saying about this drip factor, but that first slide there where how do we steer people through life, knowing like in today's world sort of thing, sort of becoming future-proof, that's that idea.
Yeah.
In today's world where time is the most valuable resource we have, I mean, we can give money very easily, but you're asking to give it time?
Very hard. Yeah.
Now you're asking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What does that actually look like then for pastors, deacons, your church leadership to actually do that and actually give that? Because what I'm hearing you say, and I agree, this is what you're saying, it's about relationship, it's about journey. That person who comes in has been living one way forever, 30 years now, you want them to change. It's not, you can't whack them up in the Bible. But we've got a journey with them. And by journeying with them and discipling, that's the drifting I'm seeing. And going to God's word regularly with them. But there lies the problem. It's the time factor that's required. And how do we do that?
Well, the a priori thinking among most Christians as well as most secular people in the West, and from what I can see in Sydney, is that your aim in life is to get the best education you can so that you can get the best university qualification you can, to get the best job you can, and to do 6 violin lessons and 4 sports. I hate to say it, I thought Perth was bad. And somehow you have to say that's not the good life. Because the bad life is not going to take our people away from Jesus as much as the good life. That's the life that's going to take them away from Jesus. Not Oxford Street on a Saturday night necessarily. Right? And I think in one sense, I've been saying it, what does it look like for Christians to go, you know what, if for 4 generations we lived just different kind of lives and we dialed down the busyness and we just +1'd a meal once a month with other Christians, even though I don't want to. See, I don't even want to go to church, but I'm glad afterwards that I did, by the way. And I was the pastor, right? What does it mean to dial down and dial up? See, I've been in Ninja Church. We did household church in England. We were part of the Crowded House network, full disclosure. It blew apart. And it blew us apart. Why? Because it set an impossibly high bar for how we should live our lives, which every night was somewhere else with other people doing mission and life. And that was great till you were 28, and then awful. And so everyone just explodes out of it and goes and sits in the back pews of a big church for the next 10 years while they reassemble their lives. How can I go, I want to dial down this meaning and purpose project of the world and dial this up? Part of it's going to be where you're preaching. Part of it is going to be by how you challenge people. But you're going to get a core group will do it, I think, and then you're not going to, otherwise you're a cult. If you rope it off, right, here's your boiler suit, and here, this is what we're doing, and that's not going to work. But if the gospel is as compelling as it is, and Jesus is as compelling as he is, as you preach Jesus and show the gospel and you have a cohort that starts to live life together a bit more, they might just let some of those other things, right? And the test case, this is the test case for me, right? This is a place called Mindarie Keys, north of Perth, about 40 k's north of Perth, where we had a staycation one summer. Because you get a really expensive place in Perth for cheap during January because it's 45 degrees while everyone else is down south. And so this is Mindarie Keys. Now, my wife grew up about 10 k's south of there, and none of this existed 30 years ago when we got married. It was just like most of Western Australia, sandy, windy wasteland. But they built Mindarie Marina. And there's the rocks that protect what is actually a very treacherous line of coast. Very windy, very rough. And you couldn't build these little harboured areas here without these, the groins and the marina. And this is all very sheltered and this is all very stormy. And this is the back veranda of the balcony of the place we rented. It's fantastic. And then further down here, as you walk down there, they've got a brewery, microbrewery, restaurants, fun. And on this side, wind and, pretty windy. Even the beach sign said, "Do not swim here." They said it's too dangerous. You had to go further down the coast. The front door of the apartment, every time you open it, blew into your face. It was salt encrusted, but the back looked like that. And we walked down to the marina, one of the restaurant one evening, and it was heaving with people on a Saturday night. And I looked around it and I said to Jill, my wife, does anyone even think about Jesus in a place like this? No. But that's because everyone is trying to, in Australia, craft their own personal Mindarie Marina. That's Australia. And whatever that Mindarie Marina looks like for you, you do you. If it looks like you're living sexually the way you want to, you do you. If it looks like you're living conservatively with a good job and you've got a holiday home in Mindarie and a house down on the south coast, do that. Hey, who are we to say? So everyone's trying to craft their Mindarie Marina life. But every now and then, a rogue wave or a strong wind will blow over the top of your Mindarie Marina. And that's when people start to ask a lot of questions, I think. Death, disappointment, divorce, despair. You could keep the alliteration going on that one. And a rogue wave washes away their meaning and purpose project. And then people ask questions. And I think you've got to do the hard work with the generations coming through. So my daughter is getting married in 3 weeks, graduated from Notre Dame last year in Perth. She was the valedictorian at Notre Dame, primarily because she did a literature and history degree, and if you don't have a view of God, what's the point of doing, you've got no understanding of history. But when she was in first year, she said to me, I can't believe how insecure all of my peers are. Everyone's afraid to say what they think, and everyone hedges around each other. And she had a very thick Christian community life at church. Because when she was 10, all the 17-year-old girls would take out the young girls for a, milkshake, bit of a Bible read, and buy something cheap at Smiggle, which we promptly put in the bin. No, and when she was 17, she started doing that for the 10-year-old girls at church. And when she was at 17 at school, and she was going to 3 or 4 weddings in a year of her 25-year-old friends, people at school was, how come you've got friends who are getting married? Who's got friends? How do you go to so many weddings? Because my friends are getting married. You got friends who are getting married? Yeah, they're 25. You got 25-year-old friends. Started to build a community in which all of those relationships started to preference each other in thick ways. 20 years ago it was, don't go to church, go on Sunday morning to something else and try to do mission. You can't do that by yourself. And so framing God in looks like framing God in the context of a community, which you have to dial down some of the Mindarie Marina life. And that's just discipleship 101 in the West. You'll hardly take a bullet for Jesus against the wall if you can't say no to Sunday sport. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. We thought we were liberating ourselves when we said we're just every day's the same, and suddenly everyone's looking for ritual. Something about it, I think. And I think the search for self is hard. Search for self called off after 38 years. Because it's a boom and bust exercise. Keller said it, the modern self is exceptionally fragile. While having the freedom to define and validate oneself is superficially liberating, it is also exhausting. You and you alone must sustain and create and sustain your identity. This has contributed to unprecedented levels of depression and anxiety and never satisfied longings for affirmation. How much affirmation is enough in the modern world? Just a little bit more. Everyone got a trophy all the time. But still not enough because there's something missing at the centre. Alan Noble said it. If I am my own and belong to myself, then I must define who I am. My parents can name me and the government can issue me a social security number, but only I can decide my identity. The contemporary understanding of humanity decrees that each of us has the freedom and responsibility to define that identity. That's the treadmill of the culture. Christianity doesn't look so bad in the face of that, does it? But you can see why people are going to other, more certain frameworks as well. I lived in New Zealand last year for 3 months, just filling in at a church in Christchurch, next to the University of Canterbury. The biggest threat to Christian unions was not the LGBTQI club. It was cults. People were lining up to join a cult because they're getting love bombed. Yeah, same piece of pizza on the same thing, except it's L. Ron Hubbard. That's what's happening. People are looking for that meaning and purpose. I think too that the church can out-relate the culture. We're not alone. We're bound together in Christ. We don't play that card very well. The body life. What it actually means, that not just that we get together, but that somehow we are bonded together. And it's interesting in Ephesians, in the pagan setting, where there's the great temple of Diana or Artemis of Ephesus, Paul uses temple language and building language to describe the people of God. In the face of all the edifices of the world, he says this is the edifice that actually means something. What does he say? Consequently, you're no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. And he goes on to say, and you're rising to become a holy temple in the Lord. There you are in the midst of one of the great ancient wonders of the world, Temple of Diana. And God goes, hold my beer, I'll show you a temple. And I don't think we lean into that very well. What does it mean to be a people together? But I actually think that other people looking at us actually envy it a little bit. You know that slide we had? So I haven't said it today, I'm a runner. And runners will tell you they're runners. So I'm telling you. And vegans will tell you they're vegans, but I'm not a vegan, but imagine a vegan runner. They'd be insufferable. This is the TSRC, which is a partisan group from communist Czechs. Now, it looks like it is, but that's my friend's running club in Perth. He now lives in Melbourne, Tony Smith Run Club. This is Tony. And this is Kat, who now lives in Hawaii. And this is Gillian, an Irish friend of mine who lives in Perth. And they are sort of sub-elite runners. There's the best stadium in Australia, Optus Stadium. And Gillian is a lapsed Irish Catholic. And she belongs to 2 run clubs. She did. She used to belong to TSRC, that Tony was leading, which is a sub-elite kind of group. They're all very fast runners. And then she would come along to the Big Table Run Club, which was based around a big table because it met at the same place that a church met at, which met around a big table, so it was called the Big Table. Imaginatively named. And you run a lot and you talk a lot with people when you're training for a marathon. You talk a lot about life. I've run thousands of kilometres with Gillian training for marathons. And one time she said to me, I envy you Christians. I said, why? You're a lapsed Irish Catholic. You're supposed to hate us. And she goes, no, during COVID, just the way you got together and were able to look after each other as if you knew what to do. I said, really? I didn't notice it. She said, yeah. I said, but that's just normal life for me. She said, I've never seen that before. Never. And I suddenly realised that the unity that the gospel brings is a sustaining power for God's people in the next 30 to 40 years, and it is highly attractive to people looking for something to bring people together. Because our cultural moment is that we don't know what brings us together. I wrote about this the other week, that we're in a state at the moment where we don't know if this direction is right or that direction is right or what even this country stands for, and we're trying to put something on top of that to try and give us some sort of unity, because our unity is fracturing. And I went to the NBL basketball Pride round a few years ago, and this is what was across the back: stronger as one. We can't bring unity around any common vision except for your hyper-expressive individualism. The great irony. We want to bring everyone together as one around you do you. It's hilarious. I got there with my son and he goes, oh, I forgot it was the Pride round, and you get handed a cardboard Pride flag. And on the back of it, it said, when you hear the sound of the harp, lyre, zither, and all sorts of musical, well, it felt like a... And it said on the back of it, when they play the music, stand up and wave it, everyone. Because they want unity around a project. And most people didn't. And a modern stadium is designed to get you out quickly at the end, and this disappeared, unity. But we are trying to get unity in our modern West around personal identity issues. Manly 7, anyone? Blew the place apart. Do you remember that? They do. Robert Bella, who coined the term expressive individualism, said just when we are in many ways moving to an ever greater validation of the sacredness of the individual person, our capacity to imagine a social fabric that would hold individuals together is vanishing. Our mediating institutions. There's the government, there's the individual, the things in the middle that buffer those. Churches, great examples. You say, I can't get a volunteer at church. No volunteer organisation can give volunteers, because we're outsourcing that to paid things so we can get on with that busy life we're living. We won't go through all of this. What time do we need to finish this session, Gab? 10 minutes? So we're living in a polarised world. People are not merely physically separating, but politically, culturally and psychologically too. We're polarising, cutting ourselves off, I should say deliberately, from folks we don't agree with. And we now live in a nation where, what is it, 1 in every 4 or 5 houses is a single person dwelling. And now they're thinking of putting taxes on rooms. Now that's been done before in the Georgian era when they taxed your windows. That's why there were so many bricked up windows in houses. So we have people who are living alone. So church is going to have to figure out how to do life well for people who don't know how to do life well with other people. Who live alone, who live mediated lives online, who go down rabbit holes and become weirdo. And we're going to have to figure out how to do life together with less traction with each other than what we've had in the past. And that might just mean we might have to dial up the level of community life we do together deliberately, not assuming that people will get together as often as they used to, and we'll have to train them and nudge them and nurdle them into how to do that well. And it might be we just need to spend more time having meals together with people that aren't normally like us in church. It's hard to do in Sydney, I get it. We can't all live, sort of in the back block somewhere. But we need to dial up the level of believing what we believe about ourselves as the body. And I think it's critical. Bundaberg Bears, right? It's just you don't have to drink Bundaberg, but everyone knows Bundy Bears, yeah? So there's a great ad from a few years ago, these old blokes sitting having a beer, drinking like this, looking grumpy, and over there in the corner at the pub, the bears playing pool and darts, and the old guys look over and go, those bears look like they're having a good time. And you kind of want to be the Bundaberg Bears as the Christians, that people look on and go, there's something about the way you do life together that my friend Gillian is envious of. But it has to have at its centre the gospel. That's got to be the drawing card. Because when Gillian said, what is it about? I said to her, at the Tony Smith Run Club, if you fell out with someone, how would it work? And she said, it wouldn't. I said, yeah, because at your run club, running is the centre of your run club. And at the Big Table Run Club, Jesus is at the centre of the run club. A year after this is all finished now. They had a fallout. Bad fallout. I don't know too much about the details, but it's pretty seedy. And at the start line of races, for a couple of years, those who were on one side of that fallout stood here, and those who were on the other side of that fallout stood there. Off you go. And in one sense, that's a lesson to the church, isn't it? If we want to do relationship well and build and grow as the temple, then we can't say to Mrs. Jones who falls out with Mrs. Smith, you sit over there and you sit over there, and we go, no. We have to model what it looks like to do costly relationship and get it right in our own churches. We're going to have to lean into, because what's the problem? You know that if someone in church does something that you think, this is a discipline issue, we need to disciple this person away from that behaviour towards this behaviour and express forgiveness, what would they do the week after you said that to them? Go somewhere else, often. And what would the pastor at that other church never do? Pick up the phone and ask you. In one sense, we have to have an ecosystem which says, no, you are not your own, you're bought with a price, and you belong to this body. This is how it's put together. You're not on your own now. And that's scary news and cool news. You're not on your own. It's a whole mind shift. And the next 30 years, we're going to have to figure that one out. In an atomized world in which we're quite polarized and we've got enough social capital to live our own lives our own way. I think the last thing, we won't finish this, the church will outlast the culture. We've got eternity on the horizon. One of the biggest issues I wrote about in Futureproof, I didn't write about it initially, was how people feel about the future of the planet. Because, it's an issue. And even if you don't think it's an issue, it is in people's minds. But in keeping with this promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells. This young woman, Louise, shut down the M25 in London by rappelling up a gantry over the M25 and clipping herself in for the Just Stop Oil campaign, or Extinction Rebellion it was actually. And she said, I'm here because I don't have a future. And that's how young people feel. Now bear with the language on this slide. Thousands of these posters were put up across Melbourne University. And there you are telling your young kids, work really hard at school, get to the university of your choice, go do that degree in history or literature, become a great, and you're telling them, what's the point? That was the problem. Someone sent me this and said, this is plastered all over my university. The cognitive dissonance of being told, live your best life now, but there's no point because it's all done, is killing people. And we're killing people. You know what that is? Not an iron, by the way. It's a euthanasia pod. And in the Atlantic, which is hardly a conservative journal, talking about Canada, at the centre of the world's fastest growing euthanasia regime is the concept of patient autonomy. Honouring a patient's wishes is, of course, a core value in medicine, but here it has become paramount. Euthanasia has ramped up across the Western world, and no one will say anything about it at one level, because it's not about we don't view you as a valuable human being. It's about you are so valuable to yourself, and your opinion about yourself matters so much that who are we to say what you can and cannot do with your body? That's where we're at. One last slide, can I do? Yeah. Tom Holland, not Spider-Man, the other one. No, this really is post-Christian. New Canadian survey and attitudes to euthanasia. 27% think people should have access to euthanasia because of poverty, which rises to 41% among the 18 to 34-year-olds. You 18 to 34-year-olds in this room, see your problem? You're all vicious and nasty. No, you believe in personal autonomy so much that who are you to decide that someone who's poor should not be allowed to end their life upon their own ideas? 28% people in Canada think you should have access to euthanasia because of homelessness, 43% for mental illness, and 50% for being disabled, rising to 60% among the 18 to 34-year-olds. That's the future. And who will the 18 to 34-year-olds be in 30 years' time? The politicians and leaders of our country. 5% of Canadians die through euthanasia at the moment. 5%. Those numbers will go up. And given the financial crisis, the lack of housing, the spike in mental illness, and the issues around body dysmorphia, don't you think those numbers will go up? That is what society looks like without a future hope. No theology of suffering, no idea of where there's a... You cannot say to someone anymore, you can't do that to your body because we have a community that looks at life differently. You go, so what? This is an autonomous age. That's scary.
Just want to clarify, you're saying that there's a rise in the view that euthanasia is to become more and more a medical service.
Yes.
I choose to end my life for various reasons, including those things listed there.
It already does. And they had the case in the Netherlands last year of a 29-year-old girl who was allowed to end her life because of mental illness with the approval of 2 physicians. So it's not this, you know, there's no such thing as a slippery slope. It's not a slippery slope. It's a watershed. You either believe this about humans and that takes you somewhere, or you believe this about humans and that takes you somewhere else. But it won't be because we're being jackbooted into history by fascists that everyone's getting. We're doing it to ourselves as the pinnacle of our freedom. What might church look like in 30 years' time? In that kind of world. Where you might want to help the poor, the homeless, the broken, who've been told the best option you have is to end it. I think we're in for a rough ride. Mark Sayer says, it's not, we're going to have a beautiful apocalypse. It'll be bright and shiny, but a complete facade. Because we're all waiting for the zombie apocalypse, right? We'll show you, you'll give Jesus up and it'll look terrible. There'll be, and I live in Sydney and I look out over at the Give Jesus Up crowd. It looks pretty colourful. But it's hollow. We've got to have something more. Next session, you can ask, what does that look like? We'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys.